Hi everyone, so today I want to show, due to demand and the amount of messages that we're getting, we're going to show you how to do an artificial wreath for a funeral, probably for a grave, something that you can leave on the grave for a long time. Now the technique I'm going to show you will be old-fashioned, a bit like myself, old school training. Nowadays, it's because I suppose silk has become so popular. There's nothing out there, you know, that way for making a silk wreath on that's going to keep it heavy to stop it blowing away. Years and years and years ago, like when I would have trained first, silk wreaths were so popular. So how we made them was we made them on a fresh moss frame. But I'm going to show you how we sealed it in and you basically got an everlasting frame. And amount with the silk wreath, it was a ton weight. And you know, psychologically, when somebody picks up something and it feels heavy, they always kind of think it's more expensive. Now the thing is, probably the only people that probably know how to do a wreath this way is probably people my age and a little bit older. Now obviously I'm only 21 plus a little bit of that, okay? So you do find there's a whole generation, maybe 2 or 3 generations of people out there who haven't a clue what I'm going to show you. But it's just because a lot of you were messaging me and you were saying that you were using an oasis base, you know, that way, and some of you were wetting the oasis base and sticking the artificial flowers into it. Well, eventually the oasis base will dry out, plus the oasis goes stale, it starts to crumble and falls apart. So long term that wasn't a great success. Others of you left the frame dry. You glued the silk flowers into the wet oasis that wasn't wet, you know, that way. But again, it was so flimsy, it was so light, you know yourself, like wet oasis only actually gets strong when you actually wet the foam. And then there's a small, very small supply of artificial or dry oasis frames out there. Now there's not a huge selection because again, they haven't been really in demand. And again, using the dry oasis, I think dry oasis weighs even less than wet oasis that's not actually wet. So first of all, start making a list, because I don't have any notes included in this program, okay? Make a list of what materials you're going to need. So the first thing you need is a wire frame. And on previous tutorials, you'll find them on YouTube, I've showed you how to make a wire frame out of a coat hanger, and you could use that as well. Now I'm using a 10-inch, but it'll turn out quite big. I'm using a 10-inch because that's all I have here today, to be honest, you know what I mean? But if you wanted to make this silk wreath a little bit larger, a 12-inch frame would be absolutely perfect. Now to make the base, I'm going to use fresh moss. And ideally, fresh moss is the best thing to use. You could probably use straw, but there's an awful lot of wires to go down through the frame to get all the silk flowers kind of like in place. And you will find with the straw, it's going to slow you down. So ideally is to use fresh moss. And this moss is kind of damp, you know, though it's not dry and it's not wring wet either. But when I've actually mossed the frame, what I often do is I actually dip it in water, do you know the way? Now not for ages, just to really wet the frame. And it's the water that actually provides the weight. Now you'll need a lot more moss than this, but I'm just showing you the materials. And this moss, by the way, is from Manor Hamilton. Do you remember the woman in Manor Hamilton? So this is the moss that I'm using. Now to secure the moss onto your wire frame, you need a roll of real wire. And you could use a roll of hand-tied twine and that would do the exact same job. So whatever you're happy with using. Now this is something you probably haven't seen. Now it is available in the wholesalers to buy. Now I have most other stuff for sale, but I don't have any of this. Now this is called wreath wrap. So as in wreath, W-R-E-A-T-H, wrap as in W-R-A-P. And it's like kind of a roll of bandage, okay? It's nearly if you got like a black refuse bag and you cut it up into strips and you put it onto a roll, only it's quite flimsy, you know, that way it's quite light, this plastic, okay? And this is what we use to seal in the wet moss, do you know that way? And that's sealed in and that's what holds the moisture. And sometimes you'd often find if there was a tiny little hole, you actually see a little bit of grass would often grow out of it. I'm talking months and months later, you know that way. But you're sealing in the moss, you know the way, there'll be absolutely no smell from them. You could do this way in advance. So if you found that you had a demand for making a lot of these frames, you know that way, you could have the frames all prepared in advance and all wreath wrapped up. You know, I often talk about Christmas and I say about getting your frames ready for Christmas. There is people out there that literally in January, so after Christmas, okay, in January, they start mossing up their frames, but they wrap them up in the wreath wrap to seal them in. Now again, it would be an older generation florist, but that's how when it comes to the following Christmas, like 12 months later, 11 months later, they have all their frames prepared. And especially people that are able to get the moss for nothing. So they're the main things that you need to start off the frame, and you'll need a little bit of sellotape as well. You'll see me using it. Now I want to show you then, say, flower wise. Now I just have a selection of silk flowers in front of me, and I will kind of go through each of the flowers and kind of show you the preparation work. But like you need what we call like a main flower, you know, that way to have in your wreath. It's like when you're doing fresh wreaths, you know, the way I may have showed you to start off with 5 Germany or 6 Germany as being your main flowers. So I would say to you, you know, that way is to get like a nice big flower. You know, I mean, a hydrangea would work out perfectly as well. But I think for the size frame that I'm making today, this hydrangea would be a little bit too large. But again, if you use the 12-inch or the 14-inch frame, this would be perfect. Now when you're using something on a natural stem, because these actually came on a natural stem, don't waste any of that foliage that's on it, because you will see I will be depending on the foliage that I have on these silk flowers to use as the foliage kind of like in my wreath, okay? So you could use these, you know, that way. Now sometimes somebody will buy silk flowers and they don't have any stems on them. So this particular flower here, when you buy them, and most of the silk flowers, actually all of the silk flowers that I have here, these are all available from, you know, your man Charlie in RD County Loud, Everlasting Silk Green Plants, Everlasting Silk. It's one of them names I have a complete mental blank on. I always seem to say it backwards. So these particular flowers, they came in a little bag, and there was 6 in the bag, okay? And when you took them out of the bag, you know what I mean, they were kind of like closed like that. So you kind of open them up, and a little bit of fluffiness, you know, that sort of way. And you can see then, like, they open out beautiful. But they don't have any stems on them. Now, you can buy the stems loose. But the thing is, you probably have lots of stems off these silk flowers. So what I did, this was a stem of blossom. Now, I've cut off some of the stems already, right? So there was a lot more on this stem. And again, maybe during some of my lives, you've seen me using these flowers, okay? Now, I normally like push up the greenery like close to the flower, you know that way, so literally, if it is possible, with the hydrangea, the leaf was kind of separate, you know what I mean, so I couldn't push it up the stem. But if it's any way possible at all, you know, like, let me see, I had that in kind of a pinky colour, here we go. If it's possible at all, I go along and I kind of like push the silk flower up near the head, you know, that way, that I'm actually using the silk leaf is what I meant to say, the silk leaf I'm pushing up towards the stem. So going back to the blossom, okay, I'm possibly only going to need it about that length there, that length there, that length there. Open your scissors real wide and use the serrated part at the back, otherwise you'll blunt your scissors. So do you see these stalks that was left over? I just cut them to the length I want. What would you say, 12 centimetres thereabout. And then the heads, you can see, talk about waste not, want not. Then I'm able to stick the full stem up into the end of it, and that's how I got the stem, you see, on it. So if any of the flowers haven't got a stem, that's what you'll be able to do. But most of the others, say like that, you know what I mean, that was kind of like one of the Hebe lavender ones that you have. Again, I just cut that one a bit shorter. And these are these kind of like, again, like a little lavender Hebe kind of filler. Again, I'll be cutting them short, you know the way. These little bushes, not sure, I think it's kind of like a lily bulb, alstomary sort of a flower. And again, I'm cutting that one, cutting that one, cutting that one, cutting that one. Do you get the idea? You know that way. So to go and buy flowers on long stems, like say the hydrangea, you would end up just cutting it. I don't cut this one because I'm not actually going to use it. For the moment anyway, I don't think I'm going to use it. These little bushes are great, you know what I mean? So again, once you've salvaged all the foliage and pushed it up the stem, cut it, open your scissors really wide. You can actually buy a little wire snips, you know, that sort of way. Oasis have them for sale on their site. And again, you could keep some of them in case you ever need a stem to stick up in some of the loose flower heads. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut up all these flowers. Now some of them that are on a stem like that, rather than cutting them off individually, is I'm going to cut in between it. So you see the way I'm making like little groups of flowers, you know the way, and then leave them 2 heads together and again cut them. So again, I'm getting, you know, 2 pieces out of that one. And again, I have these, there was obviously some of them cut off already. So with this one, we cut in between, we cut in between, cut in between, cut in between. So do you see the way you're getting great mileage out of them? Now, I would suggest to you, a bit like fresh flowers, buy colours and shades that kind of complement each other. You know that way. It's very hard when you introduce something like white, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So if you go purple and white, pink and white, red and white, the white will always stick out like a sore thumb. You really have to be careful that you divide it evenly, you know what I mean, and get your balances and your proportion right. Now it can be done, I'm not saying you can't do it, but it is going to be harder. And if you go wrong, it'll stick out in the photograph. Look, them two white flowers right beside each other, or look, there's no white flowers over that side of it. Where if you go to all shades and blends of the one colours, like the way on the colour wheel you have your purples and your pinks, and you can see even here I've different shades of purples and different shades of pinks. They're all side by side on the colour wheel. You basically can't go wrong. The more textures you get, you know the way, again, I haven't priced any of this, so you'll have to actually go on to the Evergreen site or send Charlie some photographs and ask him the prices. But what I would suggest is get as many textures and varieties and different shapes, you know what I mean, in your silk flowers. The same way when you're doing fresh flowers with me, I'd say don't do the arrangement in only all carnations, or don't do the arrangement in only chrysanthemums, or don't do the arrangement in only Germany. Mix them, do you know the way? Big flowers, small flowers, you know the way, little fillers. These will be like my little fillers. Like instead of using sea spray or jip or wax flower, these will be like my fillers kind of for going in between them. And again, lots of different textures. And even with the flowers, you know that way, you can see all the different shaped flowers that I'm going to have. And that's what makes your arrangement a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to clear up everything and then we bring it to the next stage. So I've now cut all the flowers, the artificial flowers, short, like I showed you. And now I'm going to wire them. Now make sure it's a 20 gauge wire that you use. A 22 is no good. Now the wires I have are probably 12, 14 inches in length. You'd probably get away with 10 or 12 to be honest, okay? It just means I'll have more wire to get rid of afterwards. Years ago when we made them, we would have always used a 19 gauge wire. And a 19 gauge wire is double the thickness of a 20 gauge wire. So it is that little bit more secure. Now you're probably going to say, well, would you recommend getting 19 gauge? I actually think if you're going to make a lot of these, because some of you could be in an area and you'd say, this is actually a big seller for me, and I think this is going to go really well in my area, I'd probably say to yes, then go out and buy a bunch of 19 gauge wires, 10 or 12 inch in length, probably the 12 inch if you want to go and make bigger wreaths. So what you're doing now is, do you remember the old technique I showed you back on module 1, the hairpin bend and wrapping the wire around? Now I'll do this a couple of times, and again we can zoom in closer just so that you see it. In floristry, when we bend the top of the wire, probably 1.5 centimeters, okay, we call that a hairpin bend, or we often call it a one-legged mount. Sounds a little bit sexier than it actually is, but just that it has 2 legs. If you were to bend the wire in the middle, and you still make the little hairpin bend, but you have 2 legs coming out of it, they call it a 2-legged mount. Sounds even sexier, doesn't it? But that's all it is. Now what you do is at the end of the stem, okay, the plastic stem, and an odd one is a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. What you do is you place the hairpin bend horizontal with the flower stem, okay? A lot of people think when I've made that hook that I'm actually hooking it around the stem. I'm not. Now I have false nails on at the moment and it makes it a little bit more awkward, okay? Seeing the nail bars are back open again. But you will find shorter nails are probably better if you're doing a lot of these, okay? So do this a week that you know what I mean, you're not getting your nails done. So you place your hairpin bend on the bottom of the stem of the flower. And I'm a right-handed person, so I always use, remember you're looking at this probably mirror image, but I always have my right hand, this is my right hand, for twisting the wire because it's where I have all the strength. My left hand is my weaker hand, and when you're holding the flower, if you hold it with your hand on top rather than underneath, which is the natural thing for you to do. Again, any of my module 1 students, this is one of the first things I showed you. Do you remember? On top, on top, on top. So your left hand is on top, pinching that hairpin bend, holding it quite close to the end of the stem. Your right hand, now see if you're left-handed, you're doing it backwards to me. So with your strong hand, you hold the wire halfway down. Again, a mistake people make is to come up too close. So halfway down, and it's if you were making a little handle out of it. Can you see what I've just done there? Kind of bent it on an angle, and again around and around and around 3 times and straighten back out again. And you will have a little bit of a bend in the wire there. Now I'm going to do this a few times that you can see it from different angles. Now to show you that technique again, using the table as a background. So your left hand is holding the flower from on top. Your right hand has the wire, if you're a right-handed person obviously. The top of the wire, you're making what we call the hairpin bend. You place it horizontal, level with the stem of the flower, close to the bottom. Your left finger and thumb kind of pinch that together nice and tight, but you're leaving a little bit of space there, right? With your right hand, you hold the wire approximately halfway down. Don't hold the wire up there. Everybody does that, okay? So a little bit away from it. And then you're kind of like making like a handle. You can see the way I've bent the wire on an angle, and you go around about 3 times, really, really tight, and straighten back out again. And yes, you'll have a little bit of a dinge on the wire there, but it's absolutely perfect. I think you probably need to see that again, do you? So we go again. I'm using a different item this time. It's kind of like one of the little blossoms. Pinch it with your left hand, and when I say your hand is on top, this would be wrong. You see, I'd call that underneath. So bring your hand on top of the stem. Your strong hand has the wire, and you make what we call that little hairpin bend, the one-legged mount I showed you earlier on. You rest it on the end of the stem, you know what I mean, you can move it up a little bit there, and with your weaker hand, my left hand, you grip it, and like you're not hooking that wire around it. It's literally just resting level, and you're leaving a little bit of space there. With your stronger hand, hold the wire halfway down. Kind of make a bend in it, like a little handle. And again, go around about 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and straighten it back out again. You'll have a little bit of a dinge in the wire there. It's absolutely perfect. And there's your item wired. Now you have to do that to all the flowers, and that's going to take a little bit of time. So now the hard work is that you have to use that technique I've just shown you, and you wire up absolutely everything. So even these little fillers, bending my wire, making the hairpin bend, resting it horizontal, gripping it with my finger and thumb, holding the wire halfway down, and wrapping it around 3 times, a hay in a dough with 3, and straighten back out again. So you can see there the way we show you all the little tips and tricks, you know, the way, and that we come in close, that you can see like the different angles, you know, that way for wiring it. So that's how all our tutorials are done for our professional commercial courses. This is a free tutorial, you know, that way, that I'm making available. But just in case you're wondering, you know, that way with our other classes, whether it be Module 1, Module 2, Module 3, Module 4, if they're making an archway, they're making a candelabra, they're making a simple little posy arrangement, a buttonhole, a corsage, a flower girl's hoop, no matter what they're making, we show everything in detail. You can come in really close there, you'll see it from different angles, and you can see obviously when you get good at it, you know, that way you can kind of do it fairly fast. I find the nails is getting in the way. You know, you're wrapping that wire around, it kind of keeps hitting off the thumbnail. But you learn then after a while to kind of turn your thumb slightly sideways so that your wire is not catching the top of it all the time. As I said, you see the leaf at the bottom there, push the leaf up close to the flower. Like, don't like waste the leaf, because I've very little foliage to use in this funeral tribute, you know, that way. So I want to like salvage as much of the foliage as I possibly can. Now if you do have any other foliage, like say from plants, artificial plants, etc., you can cut them up and you can use them as an extra foliage or an extra kind of selection, you know, that way, different texture going through it. So as you wire them up, you know, the way, try and keep all the same ones together. So I have all that bundle wired up, so I'm going to place that together on the table, and you can see I still have loads to do. So I'm going to keep going now with wiring up all the rest of them. At this stage, I have all the flowers wired and prepared. I'll show you them in a few minutes. So our next thing to do is get the frame made. So this is the 10-inch wire frame I showed you earlier, and a roll of real wire. So we're just going to stick that through, give it a spin 2 or 3 times. You can tie a knot if you want to, any old way at all to attach it onto the frame. You could, if you're using the hand-tied string, just tie a normal knot. Now, here beside me, I have the fresh moss. It's damp, okay? It's not soaking wet, but it's wet, you know what I mean? So it means it's quite heavy. And I'm going to put this moss on quite thick, because the thicker you put the moss on, the heavier the frame will be. Obviously, the more moisture your moss can absorb. Now, if the moss that you're using at home is dry, your best thing to do is make the frame when it's dry, and then just dip the frame like Oasis down into a bucket of water. Moss is a natural sponge, so it just takes up the water, no problem at all. A good soak and a good spray will do the same job. So get your moss, you know, that way. This moss is so nice, you can nearly see the way I'm able to roll it. Like today it's a Swiss roll, you know the way you'd often hear me saying roll it into a big fat sausage. Today it's nearly a Swiss roll shape, okay? You're going to place your Swiss roll or your sausage onto your frame, you're going to get the real wire. I just see the window cleaner is outside there, got a bit of a fright, he's cleaning the windows, and we're going to pull our real wire nice and tight, round we go again, pull it nice and tight, round we go again, pull it nice and tight, and you keep doing that. Now maybe the moss that you put on could be a little bit shorter, do you know that way? And where that was a nice big thick piece, so it got a good way around the frame, which just kind of speeds you up. So again, now this one isn't as handy, so we just kind of get that together, and you can see the way I'm rolling it into a frame. Hope the window cleaner doesn't buzz the door, by the way, during all this to get paid, which you probably will, but sure, listen, this is a live class, in a way, we're pre-recording it. So again, you can see the way I'm adding on another big sausage of moss, and around we go. And around we go, just to let you see what it looks like so far. But I'll always go around it a second time. Now, I never go around just the once, okay? And again, we get another big lump of moss. This one, actually, I could nearly roll that one again. So big sausage shape. And again, place it down onto the frame, and around you go with the real wire. I'm possibly leaving about 3 centimeters between each of the wraps with the wire. You can see the way I'm spinning it around. Now, I always work with the mossing side towards my stomach, towards my belly. You know, that way I find it's easier. I see a lot of you work from the other side. That's going to make it harder. I think it makes it harder anyway. But you listen, you get your own way of doing this. So come around, there's a little bit of a gap here, so what I'm just going to do is get another little section. Don't skimp on the moss, whatever you do. This is like kind of the cement to hold the wall up, you know that way. This is the basics of the frame. And again, added that piece there, and around we go. Now this time I'm just going to go around with the real wire a second time. So the second time round, pull extra tight, round you go, pull extra tight. If you thought at any stage that you needed to add in an extra little bit of moss, you can do that. Now don't skimp on this part, because as I said, this needs to be really tight, the frame, because this is what's going to secure the silk flowers in place. Now you can see already the side that I went around the second time, so this is the good side, and that's still the bad side. Now if you find that when you go around the second time with the wire and it's not that neat and not that firm, okay, go around a third time. I have a really strong hand, I have a great right hook I have, okay, so I do find I have the strength, so I'm probably pulling it an extra bit tighter than probably you. You can see how neat that is. I just have this last little bit there to finish it off, and that's our frame made. And these frames would also do for Christmas time, like for making your Christmas wreaths on, your autumnal wreaths, and so on. So then, there's a little bit hanging out there, but it'll be absolutely fine. What you then do is cut off the wire, and the little piece of wire that's left over, stick it down into the frame, and that's your wreath prepared. Now the frame is made, and it feels quite heavy, as I said, because my moss was a little bit more than damp that I was using. If you find that your moss was dry, now is the stage to just dunk it down into a bucket of water, take it back out, let it kind of drip dry, that's not dripping wet, but yet it's still full of moisture. My next stage now is sealing it in, and I'm going to bring it in close to show you the next stage. So get your wreath wrap, attach it around, and pull it. Now I guarantee you now that this is not going to look as nice as it did as a moss frame, but it is going to be completely covered in with flowers. You have to stretch the tape the way I'm doing it here, because the wires of the flowers have to pierce through it, and you try not to overlap the wreath wrap that much. You have to wrap over the edge, you know that way, but as you bring it around, you know that way, try and pull it on an angle that you're just barely overlapping the edge again. And can you see the way it's going skinnier? It's a bit like them liposuction bandages that they put on you know, to make you lose weight. Not that I ever had to use them, but you know that sort of effect. So again, to see how hard I'm stretching that, and like take your time that you're just barely overlapping, you're stretching it in, and as I said, it doesn't look as nice. Now some of the wholesalers actually sell the frame prepared like this for you if you didn't want to do it yourself. So you just continue on wrapping it around and around and around. Now somebody's often asked me, like when we used to make these, could you use like a black sack, a rubbish bag cut up into strips? Absolutely you could, but just make sure that you buy the cheapest refuse bags, you know, that it's the lighter. In other words, don't buy them big heavy duty garden bags, you know, the way they'd be no good. You won't be able to get the wires through them, and it'll make it really difficult. So the idea of the wreath wrap is to seal in the moisture, and you can see at the back there it's getting sealed in as well, right? And this is what keeps it heavy. And like 12 months later, this will still feel heavy, like I guarantee you, you know, that way. It's an absolutely brilliant idea, you know, it's a brilliant technique. So you just keep working away until you get that last little bit in, you know, that way. And again, you will have to overlap now at this stage. And then what I'm going to do is cut off what's left over. And then I'm going to use a little bit of sellotape. Again, keep a stretch on it as much as you can, because when I go to stick material in that side or that area, it is going to be just that tiny little bit more difficult because the wreath wrap has been overlapped. And again, if I have to go through the sellotape. So there's your frame, organised, you know, that way, ready to go. And as I said at the beginning of this tutorial, like some people that are able to get moss for nothing, like back say the January after Christmas, they would start preparing their frames for the Christmas, like say 12 months away. And the back of the Christmas holly wreath or door wreath, whatever, you would see this plastic frame. But what people used to say was that stopped the door getting a wet mark on it, you know, that way. Now I guarantee between me and you, the door's never got a wet mark, but it just kind of was a good way of explaining why the back of it had that plastic. So now we're ready for the next stage, which is adding in the flowers, the fun part. All my flowers have all been wired, like I showed you at the beginning of the tutorial. Now also what I did was say adding little bits of greenery that was left over. So I'm just going to unravel this one just so that you see. So I said to throw absolutely nothing out. So see, like little scraps of greenery like that, that would be left over. Okay, if you just lay them side by side, I'm just going to cut off the piece of wire here at the beginning, because you need a straight piece of wire. Make your little hairpin bend, pinch them together nice and tight, and wrap the wire around 3 times. Now I won't be able to use this one because this wire is too short, because I had to cut the bent piece off, you know the way. But that's how I have all these little pieces of greenery, you see, wired up, and they'll do as a little filler. I'm going to use this flower here as my main flower, and it's completely up to you. You know, the customer said, oh, my mum loved peonies, well then these could be the peonies. Or my mum loved sunflowers, well these could be the sunflowers. And you can use as many of them as you wish. 5 to 6 is probably a good number. These are a little flower that I'm going to use around the outside of the wreath, kind of as a complementary. These are kind of going to be filling in, and these are really for textures, you know, that way, in between absolutely everything. So the trick with these frames is to bring the frame over the edge of the table. Now again, when I go back 30 odd years, like it's hard to believe, but we used to actually give classes on making artificial wreaths, and the students would have all went home with an artificial wreath, you know what I mean, at the end of whatever day that was. And it's gas, a story that sticks in my mind. One lady said she brought home a wreath and she actually thought it was lovely, and you don't feel morbid about something that you've made yourself, you know that way, even though you know it's a funeral wreath that you're making. So she hung it over her bed. She thought it was not, I wouldn't have hung a wreath over my bed, but anyway, this girl, there's no account of her taste, she thought it was absolutely lovely what she'd made, and she hung it on her wall, nearly like a wall wreath. But she said, you know, months later, her mum-in-law came to stay with her, and they gave the mum the master bedroom. And she says the poor mother-in-law, when she woke up the next morning, she said she didn't know whether she had died and was in a funeral home. There was the wreath over her head in the bed. Anyway, back to this. So you get your wire, this is your 20 gauge wire. Bring it over the edge of the table, and you pierce the wire down through the frame. So that's why the plastic had to be pulled nice and tight. You bring it right down, you know what I mean, and you can decide what height you want it to be. And at the back there underneath, that's the wire that's left over. Now because some of these items were wired on long wires, you know the way, I have a lot of wire left over. Now you could trim that if you want to, you know that way, you could trim it a little bit shorter, because you don't need lots of wire coming out the other side. Now I'm holding it up so you can see what I'm doing, but you will see as I move on, I never hold it up in the air. So what I'm doing underneath here is making what we call like a hairpin bend, like a horseshoe shape, and then sticking it, it's easier for me to do it on the table, sticking it back up into the frame and flattening it down, do you know what I mean? And then you're able to manoeuvre that flower, to see, to hold it in place. So then you spin it around, and again you get a second spot, and you do the same thing. And because the wire is long, I'm cutting a bit off it, and this is where you have to believe me that I'm bending the wire up underneath and sticking it back up into the frame. So again, pick a spot, pierce the wire down through it, you know that you nearly hear it kind of cracking. Keep these about the same height. The wire has come through the opposite side. So the wire has come through the opposite side. You can cut a little bit off. Now don't cut it all off, okay? Because the idea is that you're making the hairpin bend, which you can't do with this hand. You make a hairpin bend like a horseshoe, and just swap over the hands. So again, this is your wire coming through the opposite side of the flower, the opposite side of the frame. You're making this little hook, and you're sticking it back up into the frame and securing it. I'm going to place it back down on the table now. As I said, for speed, it's easier if you keep it on the, it's hitting something there, if you keep it on the table. But also, when you're securing the wire underneath, I'm just trimming it again, when you're securing the wire underneath, it's if you hold the flare steady, you know what I mean? So this is the flare, hold that one steady while you secure the wire underneath. Where if you keep holding it up in your hand, you have no control over it, and then the flare is not going in straight. Spin it around on the edge of the table, then you get your next one. I'm going to go for the 6 flares, by the way, I forgot to say that beforehand. But if you would prefer to use 5 will work out grand. And a 10-inch wire would work out better. I'm using the 12-inch because that's what I started with. That was what was in front of me on the table. And then I found 10-inch, so some of the materials is wired on 10-inch. Now, because they're on wires, do you see the way you can manoeuvre them? Do you know that way? And space them out, and there's your main flares standing up on your wreath frame. There you go, give you a bit of a smile through it. And now we're ready for the outside circle. Now this time I'm using the purple and the pink. This flower is a little bit like a mini lily or an alstroemery. So what to do is you can either work directly in between or behind. I'm going to do both anyway. So I'll start off in between 2 of the main flowers, and I'll stick this flower down into the frame. Again, these are on long wires. You bring it to approximately, can you see they're the same height, right? You secure the wire underneath. This is probably what I'm going to do now in a second is I'm going to cut all the wires short to save me time. So I have this little lily, the same height as my main flowers. I'm keeping it straight. I'm securing the wire underneath like I showed you. But watch, I'm going to bend it down to the outside circle. And by using that as a height, it gives you a good idea to see how to bring it out. Now, the first time I went in between them, so the next time I'm going to go directly behind them. So this is where I'm just going to cheat here. Not going to cheat, I'm just going to cut the wires shorter, you know that way, because it's just going to make it easier for me. So just get a couple of them purple ones together, trim the ends of the wires, there you go, and now I'm going to get the pink ones and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use alternative, like a pink one, a purple one, a pink one, a purple one, all the way around. It doesn't have to be this flower. So in case you're at home and you're wondering, what's the name of that flower? It doesn't really matter. Like if I had more of that one there, I could use more of them to the outside. Maybe 6 of them to the outside with something completely different. So now I'm moving on to the purple flower. So I'm going directly behind one of my main flowers, sticking it into the frame, bringing it roughly the same height, securing the wire underneath, and again, bending that to the outside. That leaf is going to stick out a little bit further, but I'm going to use lots of foliage in between. Now I'm back to the pink flower, so I'm going in between them, okay? Same height, secure the wire up underneath and bend it to the outside. Can you see the sort of shape that you're getting? Keep spinning it on the table. So again, behind our main one, secure the wire underneath, and then what you're going to do is bend it to the outside. Now at the back of the frame, it is going to be like spaghetti junction, because all them wires are going to be secured underneath. I'll show you when I finish what it looks like. But the thing is, I'm able to go back afterwards and use like extra bits of foliage, or sometimes what I use is moss. I actually think the moss looks nicer, and I pin some moss like with German pins at the back of the frame, and it hides all the wires, you know, that way, and it looks a lot nicer. Now when you were doing a fresh wreath, you probably would have, not probably, you would have had the frame greened up first. Where with silk you don't, you know, that way you add in the silk greenery or the, you know, the little bits of greenery as you kind of go along, or wherever you feel that you actually need it, you know what I mean? So you don't make the wreath in greenery first and then go back and put the flowers in the same way that you would have done it. It's just slightly different, okay? Not slightly different, this is completely different. Just to show you so far, I'm not all the way around yet, but can you see the way the outside circle is working out for us? And as I said, I'm using every alternative one, a pink in between, and then securing the wire, bending it to the outside, and then the lilac or the mauve one directly behind that main flower, okay? Same height, securing the wire up underneath, there we go, and bringing it down to the outside. So that's kind of our outline. There you have your 6 flowers to the center, because that's what you'll be looking down on. And then we have our 12 flowers to the outside. And I know there's gaps in between it, but like afterwards, can you see the way this will all be used as little fillers, plus all the rest of the flowers? Our next stage will be this area here, okay? So I'll be moving on, I'm going to put it back down on the table, and I'll now be moving on to this area for filling in. So you're kind of doing it in stages. Your inside circle, which is not finished, I'll fill in between that afterwards. Our outside circle, which is not finished either, I'm filling in to do. And now we're kind of on the centre area of the wreath. Now this time I'm going to use a mixture, because that's what I have. It's not like that's part of the plan. So I have a couple of these, like just kind of like wired up. I have a couple of the little lilies around the outside, a couple of them left over. There's 3 of them left over, 3 or 4 of them there. So I'm going to use a couple of them. And I have a couple of kind of like the blossom, there's another one of them lilies. A couple of the little blossoms, you know that way. And again, like a little poppy there kind of cut up. I'm going to use a couple of them. So just randomly, and that's the great thing about this wreath. The only flowers that have to be the same are the ones standing up. Like even the ones around the outside, I could have mixed some of the other flowers in between that if I had wanted. So try and imagine, visualize this sort of a shape, you see, coming down all from the inside circle to the outside circle. Kind of imagine an imaginary line, the imaginary slant. And that's where you're aiming for these flowers to be. Now again, don't be worried about gaps. Okay, this one's come up in my hand, so I'm going to use it. So we're sticking the wire in, anywhere at all, right? Bring it down into, do you see the slope you see that I'm looking for? Now I know it's awkward because I have it over the edge of the table. The area that I'm working on has to be looking at me, right? So I'll turn it around to you in a second. So I'm securing that wire up there, turn it back around to you, and can you see where that flower is sitting into that area? Now I'm going to work my way around kind of in that general area. So I'm going to take up these few purple flowers, get them all roughly the same height, cut a little bit off the end of the wires because it's just going to make life easier for me. It speeds me up, you know that way. So I'm just going to try that every flower I take up is a slightly different one. You know that way, maybe if I have 3 different ones, you know that way. So putting one of these ones in. Now you often find with the silk flowers, you say, what in the name of God is that supposed to be? Do you know that way? This is one I probably could have cut the wire a little bit shorter. So I missed that one. So there we go. Watch your fingers when you go to cut the wire, by the way. And then I go back. So I have 3 flowers there. That one, and that one. And now I'm going to work my way around. Now don't worry about the gaps. Remember, I have no foliage in this wreath yet. The only foliage that's in it is the one that's actually cut onto the flower itself, you know that way. And that's why when you were wiring the flowers earlier on, I said like leave some of that little flower attached to it, or the leaf attached to it, or push it up on the frame. Again, I'm going to cut these ones a bit shorter. Should have done this beforehand, but you listen, we're doing this tutorial. It was kind of a last minute thing. We decided, well, we've been talking about it for ages. And again, it's always here at the school, it's having time, do you know that way? So we were here this morning and I said, you know what, we have a bit of time in between one thing and another, we'll get stuck in and we'll do it. So as you can see, I'm just picking up a different flower every time. You know that way, not necessarily any particular pattern. And just sticking them in. Again, I'll hold it up now in a second. Now I know what will put you off at the beginning is being able to see the plastic frame. Do you know what I mean? That's in underneath there. I'm just going to get another wire in a second for that one there. I kind of pulled it off, I did. But like the plastic frame would be covered in with your foliage afterwards. It's just unlike fresh flowers where you would cover it all in with the fresh foliage and then put the flowers where you want them to, you want to see them. Silk foliage is quite expensive. So to work in all silk foliage and then to put the flowers in, you'll waste an awful lot of it. So that's normally why we kind of change it around. Now just to show you, that's the area, you know what I mean, that I'm filling in here at the moment. You can see the way I haven't even done that area, right? So I have another few little flowers to put in there and then I'll hold it up and I'll show you where I'm going. So I've now filled in that area and there's still loads more to do. Like there's a little bit of work in these artificial arrangements. Like, you know what I mean, if you're looking for something that's going to last for ages, you're not going to make it in 5 minutes. And that's what it looks like at the back there. I'm not sure, you probably can't see it in the camera because of the dark green wreath wrap. But all the wires, but it's nice and smooth. You could run your hand along there and there's no wires going to catch into your hand. So now what I'm going to move on to be honest, you could move on to anything, but I'm going to move to the foliage and I'm going to work around the outside and you will be able to see a better shape to the wreath now at this stage, okay? So again, in between the flowers around the outside, I'm adding in little bits of foliage. And again, you could have done that at the beginning. Again, we have a couple of long wires here. I thought I'd actually done these all on short wires. Some of them are on short wires. Make sure you just don't use the long wires, okay? It is going to slow you down. You could have, when you were starting off the wreath, you know that way, when we were putting in them outside flowers, you could have added in some of that foliage at that stage, you know what I mean? But the thing is, when I went to the next stage of filling in with flowers, if any of them had foliage on it, it ended up that they were covering what you had done already. So that's why I'm kind of doing it this way. With a little bit of experience, and when you start to do a few of these yourself, you'll find out what works for you. Now at this stage, I'll just hold it up just to show you. That's the area that I've done there. Do you see around the outside? You can always pull the flower forward if it gets a little bit hidden. So you can see, and that's the area that I haven't done. So I'm going to work my way all the way around the outside. Here to there. Again, another long wire. It's a bloody nuisance it is. Here we go. Stick it in. And if you find that you're sticking something in like that one there and it bent, you know, that way, that's where it's hitting a hard piece of the wreath wrap, you know, that way. It could be, do you remember that area where I doubled over when I used the sellotape to finish it off? It could be that stage, or it could be just when you were wrapping the wreath wrap around, you went around the same part twice, you know, that way. You will learn, you know what I mean? So again, if you're copying this at home, maybe put this tutorial back on again, you know, that way, and try and work with me. And like little tips that I give you, you'll probably say, God, yeah, it was really important. You can see why she said to do that. These are just little bits of eucalyptus, and again, that was just kind of like lying around, and a bit like the other foliage. I mean, I just secured a wire onto it and just adding it in around the outside of the wreath, and it's just giving us lots of other types of textures. I find with artificial wreaths, the more textures you have in it, the nicer it's going to look. Now, I'm nearly around the outside, but just to let you see it so far. So there you go, you can see I've done there, and this is the area that I haven't covered in. So I have another probably 4 or 5 pieces still to stick in. Now remember, every Friday, I'm not sure if you're watching us on Facebook, Instagram or YouTube, but every Friday at 11 o'clock, besides maybe the odd Friday if it's a bank holiday weekend, we always have a live flower arranging class on our Facebook, YouTube pages and Instagram pages, and we'd absolutely love if you joined us. There's always giveaways, there's always competitions, there's always special offers, and the main thing is there's always a little bit of crack on it, you know, that way. Again, if you are watching this on Facebook, I'd really appreciate if you did click share. And remember, what we do here at the school are commercial courses. Now, I know at the moment I'm not giving away cost prices and selling prices here because this is a public video. But as part of our commercial programs, we do discuss cost and selling prices. What I'm going to do now is bring a little bit of greenery up in between the 6 main flowers that I started off with. Do you see it starting to take shape now? And you can see why I didn't start with lots of foliage at the beginning. And this works out a more economical way, you know what I mean? Like, as I say to the students, is try and do it like, not necessarily always the cheapest way, but the fastest way, the easiest way, but the way that you're going to make the most profit on it. And the thing is about artificial foliage, it is quite expensive. And that's what at the beginning when we were wiring up the flowers, I said don't waste any of that silk greenery. Push it up on the stem so it's going to be part of the flower, so that when we stick the flower into the wreath, you know what I mean, that little bit of greenery is actually there. And I have to say, this is making such a difference, you know, that way you can actually start to see the 6 individual flowers, where they looked at the beginning like they were joined together. But I'm going to hold it up now and give you more of an idea. And I'm not finished, I have loads more to do, okay? I have loads more to put into this. But this is what it's looking like so far. So now you can see I need a little bit more kind of filling in around here and a little bit more filling in around the outside. So the next flower I'm going to go on to now is like the blossom, okay? There's one more of them, so I'll find a little spot for it. So I'm going to go on to the blossom and let some of that bounce over the flowers as well. A little bit on the outside, a little bit in the middle, a little bit on the centre area, you know the way, no particular pattern. So again, I'm going to take these up. I'm going to cut a little bit off the end of them, do you know that way? I don't know where my junior is, she must have got sacked, she must have to give her the P45, so we just trim these all a little bit shorter. And by the way, do you see all them little bits of wires that you're cutting off? Get into the habit of folding them over in half. Do you remember the mossing pins and the German pins? Now these wouldn't do for pinning your ribbon on, but they're great for pinning on the moss and the sisal straw. We did it on module 1, do you know that way? So like, don't throw anything out. You get really mean when you're working in a flower shop. You throw absolutely nothing out. So kind of in that centre area and a little bit around the outside, I'm now going to add in, I'm using this spare flower because there was one of them left over, okay? But I'm going to use little bits of the blossom and let it kind of like bounce a little bit over the flower. And again, that gives you a little bit of texture. Like, there's nothing as bad as doing an artificial wreath in only large carnations. And I know that was the old fashioned. I would have done it myself. We would have done it here with the students when we made silk wreaths with them. But then, oh, they look so gaudy and so plain, you know that way. Where you will find with the artificial flowers, if you have lots of different textures and a little bit of bounce and a little bit of movement, all the rules, you know that way, that we would teach you on module 1 on the beginner's flower arranging class. Just because this is for a funeral, it's the last farewell as we call it, you know what I mean? You want something nice for whether it's your last farewell to your mum, your auntie, your uncle, your granny, whoever it is, your dog, your cat, you know that way, whatever. You want it to be really, really nice. And can you see the difference that little bounce is given? And one more, and I'm going to put it in here. So, I just think that has really added another dimension to your wreath. And I'm still not finished, okay? I'm now going to be moving on to fillers. So this is what it looks like. You can still see me through it. And this is what it looks like at the back. But remember, I'm going to cover in the back of it. So I'm now going to bring a little bit of texture into the centre area, but I do like to see that hole in the middle, you know, now that's personal choice. I call this wreath the eternal circle. It's eternity and it's life going on without a break, you know what I mean? So ideally you should keep a hole in the middle, but it's completely up to yourself. Now I told you to keep all them wires, but you're right there off my table, and I have boxes of these already, okay? So we're throwing them in the bin, and there is a bin on the floor there. I know I'm always throwing things on the floor. So I have a couple of these little fluffy duffies, little balls. They're like the Crosspedias. And again, I'm going to let them kind of bounce, you know, that way over my silk flowers. And there was that little bit of foliage on them already. You see, like a little spike. Do you see the difference there? And again, it's given us a lovely texture in the wreath. Just something that's a little bit different. Now I have these in 2 shades, but I'm not really being fussy which one am I picking up. You know the way, I'm not going to say I'll pick up a pink one and then I'll pick up a purple one. I meant to pick up a pink one that time, but so far I put in 3 purples. But listen, you're not going to notice. Again, we have a long wire there, so we just need to give that one a little bit of a hair trim. And we secure it in place. Now again, just to show you, there's one of them there, there's another one there, there's another one there. Again, it's only when I point it out to you. But like when you see other silk wreaths out there, you'll know what I mean. You know what I mean? You'll see where they haven't put the texture, they haven't put the detail into them. Now yes, this is going to bring up the price. The more flowers you put in, you know that way, the more expensive the wreath is going to be. But maybe this is for somebody special. And to be honest, anybody buying flowers for a funeral is for somebody special. Like you're not just going to buy flowers for a funeral for some neighbour on the road that you hardly know. So it is somebody close to them, it is somebody special, so it is worth having something nice. Now this wreath could be made a little bit smaller, you know that way, just by starting off and not bringing the outside, the top flowers, you know the way, up quite so high. You could easily make it smaller if you wanted. Remember, it is only on a 10-inch frame, but like overall, it's probably about 20 inches wide, you know that way. Like that's the great thing about a wired wreath. So there's our little fluffy little balls, you see going through it there for a little bit of texture. And now I have, like, they're like little bits of September flower. This is like a little September flower aster. And then this like a little bit of Veronica, and I think there's a little bit of Hebe there. So I'm going to use some of that coming towards the inside. And again, there's a little bit of foliage on it, so it's adding, can you see a little bit of texture and a little bit of spikes. So when you're doing flower arranging with me, I'm always talking about using different shaped flowers. Like don't have all roundy flowers or don't have all flat flowers, you know the way, like add in kind of like a 3D. So by using the different shapes and the points, you know that way, like the difference it's going to make to the arrangement. So just to show you there in the centre, but yet still keeping the little hole in the middle. And even like where I brought the greenery up in between the flowers, if you wanted to bring a little bit of the filler up in between the flowers, absolutely. You can do whatever you want. And the best advice I could give you when you're making one of these wreaths is wherever your eye goes to, you know, you'll be looking at it, and like my eye at the moment has been drawn there. So wherever your eye goes to, that's the right answer. Don't be kind of, will I or won't I? You know what I mean? Just make the decision and go for it. I guarantee you it'll be the right decision. Do you know that way? So stick them in. Now you can see, you know what I mean, I didn't need to cover the frame in with greenery at the very beginning, which is a mistake like a lot of people would make with an artificial wreath. It's not it's a mistake, it's just that you'll use a lot more material, which means it's going to bring the cost up. Isn't that September flower gorgeous? Now all the silks that I'm using here today are all from Charlie up in Evergreen Silk Plants, okay, in RD County Louth. And if you contact him, he will look after you. Again, if you go onto his website, he sells both retail and wholesale, because I know we would have a lot of our past students that are in flower shops and they're watching here. So he does both, you know that way. So just tell him whether you're buying wholesale or retail and he will look after you. And he always looks after our followers and the students of the school. You know that way, he always gives them good value. I have 2 more little bits left over, you know that way. So my arm isn't long enough to have a look, you know that way. But I think I'm probably, my eye is drawn there. And eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you know that way. I just say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, where will I go? So let's just stick this one in here. And probably on the camera, you're probably screaming out and you're saying, Janette, top left-hand corner, you need another bit there. But I can't hear you. So I'm just going to stick this one in here because I have it. because I better use it up. And the wire again is a bit too long, so we're cutting it off. I think you've all got the message anyway, don't have the wires too long. And you can see most of them, there was probably one or two I struggled, definitely one anyway. I struggled kind of getting into the frame because it was probably in the area, couldn't see it, was probably in the area where the wreath wrap had overlapped. I have one bit of greenery left over, and I think I'm just going to bring this kind of down low, down onto the frame here in the centre, just to kind of camouflage a little bit of the plastic down there, you know that way. And now I'm probably onto the back of the wreath. So this is what our wreath is looking like so far, and that's what it looks like at the back. But I'm going to cover that in now with moss, and I'll show you that on the next stage. So now to cover in the back of it, you could use some silk foliage if you want to, but I'm going to use moss, but this is moss that I have allowed to dry out, so it's actually dry moss to start off. You can see there, it's a little bit more crumbly, okay? And I'm going to use the German pins, and you could use the bits of wire that I threw in the bin there a little while ago, right? So I'm just going to spread them out on the table. Personally, I find the German pins, they're sharper and they're spikier, and you'll see now that I fly through this. Well, I'll go pretty fast. So you get your moss and you rest it on you. You can put a lot less or a lot more. And then using the German pins, a bit like hair clips, okay? That's what I'm doing, is I'm just literally pinning the moss, you see, onto the back of the frame. And it just makes it more natural looking, you see, and it makes it look like it was made on a mossed frame. Even though you know that it was made, well, it was made on a mossed frame, but it's plastic, okay? So it just looks more natural looking. I hate to see the plastic at the back, and that's why at Christmas I'm not really mad about using a wreath wrapped frame, do you know that way, for my Christmas wreaths. Now as I said, this is a little bit crumbly, you know what I mean, because it's dry, but it'll be fine. Just rest it on there. Now I have loads of moss because I got it for nothing, do you know that way, so I'm definitely not sparing. And we even have a little spider, you know the way, God, he's actually a little culchy spider, you'd know he was from Leitrim. So there we go, I'd say he's a little beetle, but we just think of him about being a little money spider, and hopefully he's going to bring us a few bob. So can you see the way the back of that, how nice now it is? It's so much nicer, and plus it looks real natural looking. And that'll, as I said, that's just going to stay dry. And these pins are great, they're really strong. You can see how easy they're going in. Now I'll probably go back over it and put a few more pins, you know me, to be feckin' well sure, you know that way. But that's the way the back of it is going to look. So probably when it was flat on the table, you know that way, you could kind of see the sides. And you were probably shouting at the telly, you know that way, Janette, you're going to fill that in. But you can see now, it's going to look so much nicer to see around the outside. So I'm just going to, just for security, I'm just going to go back over this with a few more pins. And by the way, if you hadn't got these German pins, we call them German pins, what's another name for them? Mossing pins. Mossing pins is another name for them. But you could just use the little bits of wires that was left over from the silk flowers. They just wouldn't go in as easy. And just for when we're doing this as a video, it's boring for you to watch me struggling trying to get the wires in. Where when I say these are going in, no problem at all. Like shoving them right in because they're really sharp. Be very careful with your hands. It's often happened to us here at the school. I'd have a few of them on the table. More the old table we used to have. I was clearing off the table one day and one of them just caught the little rim at the edge of the table and the second pin went right through my hand. I said to the Hail Mary in French that day, I did. So I think there's enough pins in that there now to hold that on. So that's what the back of it looks like. And there you go, that's what the front of your wreath looks like. So there is your artificial or faux flowers, or everlasting flowers, or silk flowers, or what people call an artificial wreath. But a classy looking artificial wreath. Doesn't look, as I don't think anyway, looks cheap and gaudy. Probably is working out a little bit expensive because there was no limit on what I used. I haven't itemised it. What you can do, you can rewind the video and you can count all the flowers that I used, you know the way. And again, if you get in touch with Charlie, Everlasting Silk Plants, you can purchase all the stuff from him. But listen, there's lots of other flower shops out there that sell silk flowers, but also the range. So Google the range, they're all over Ireland anyway. I'm not sure about the UK, but some of the walk around shops, they also sell silk flowers. Listen, if you enjoyed this tutorial and you're watching on YouTube, make sure to give us the thumbs up. If you're watching on Instagram or Facebook, we would really appreciate a share, but also a little bit of interaction. So comment underneath or even give us one of them little emojis, a little smiley face. We'd really appreciate it. And don't forget join us most Fridays, I won't say every Friday, but the majority of Fridays around 11 o'clock here on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube, and we always have a free live demonstration class. Listen, thanks for joining and talk to you all very soon.